Shalom Aleichem. Our topic is a wedding without a minyan, and the source that I originally was drawing on uh, is from a Sefer Divrei Talmud by Rav Avram Elia Kaplan Zatzal. Rabbi Elia Kaplan was a Talmud of Slobodka, one of the great Talmidim of Slobodka. He was called the Rakaver Ilui, and a brilliant Talmud Chacham. He went to Germany and he became a Rav and a teacher in the German Orthodox uh, rabbinical seminary, and he brought like the spirit of Lithuania and the Musar movement to Germany in a way. So a very interesting personality and uh, interesting writer has a plan for a commentary on the Talmud. There's interesting things. But I found in the Sefer Divrei Talmud, which I found in Chappelle's on the shelf in one of the classrooms. So I noticed he has a couple shilas and shuvas there. So I decided to a couple as a group of shilas and shuvas, um, and I decided to do one of them. Now, in the process of looking into this particular issue, I discovered that his position is not necessarily taken by all, and so I'd like to present the topic, God willing, as is, and then mention a number of those who very well might have argued on him. Okay. Um, Here's the tshuva. Uh, And you can see it's written in 1924, Tafresh Pei Dalid on the in Hanukkah, uh, in a place where there aren't 10 men. B'shasad chaku, it it's a time when there doesn't seem to be the option of doing it any other way. She'ein le'avisha masara. It's not realistic to bring 10 people there. Eza min habrachot yivarech mesader kedushin ve'eza lo yivarech. Which of the blessings should he make, and which should he not make? Now, um, let me just give a little background about how the Jewish wedding works, the place of the brachos in the wedding, and then the place of 10 people in a wedding. In um, in Jewish marriage, so there are two main stages, kiddushin and erusin. Uh, we refer to the stage before, which nowadays we'd call engagement. We call that shidduchim, when a couple just agrees to marry at a later date. Um, but the woman gets a status of Eshes Ish, a married woman, through kiddushin. And kiddushin means uh, an adult man gives to a woman something of basic worth, what we call shava pruta. She accepts it willingly in the presence of two witnesses, and he verbalizes that he wants to give it to her as to marry her, as opposed to just to give her a gift. So that's kiddushin. Um, there are brachos that are made uh, at the wedding connected with kiddushin, and those are referred to as birkos erusin. Again, marriage kiddushin has a synonym that is used in the Gemara a lot of times, erusin. And the the way we do it nowadays, the the Mesader Kedushin, the person who is officiating the wedding, so he gets up and he says Bari Pri Hagafen. Then he says the bracha of Asher Kiddushaну B'Mitzosav V'Tzivanu Ala Arayos. V'Asur Lanu Es Harusos. V'Hitir Lanu Es Hanesuos Lanu Al Yidei Chuppah V'Kiddushin. Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Amo Yisrael Al Yidei Chuppah V'Kiddushin. Which means roughly, he sanctified us with his mitzvahs, and he commanded us about the prohibited marriages, arayot, and he prohibited even those who are arusot, meaning even somebody uh, who is mikudeshes, even a couple that's mikudashim after kiddushin, they're still prohibited until they have chuppah also. But he permitted those who are married to us not only through kiddushin but through chuppah and kiddushin. Baruch atah Hashem mekadesh amo Yisrael al yedei chuppah v'kiddushin. And uh, famously, this line has two explanations. Either he's Mekadesh Am Yisrael, gives Am Yisrael the Kedusha of marriage, which includes within it the two stages of Chuppah v'Kiddushin, or a vastly different explanation that Hashem betrothed the people of Israel through Chuppah at Mount Sinai and Kiddushin through the Luchos. Those are two radically different explanations of that last line. Now, there are other things that are part of the wedding. At the state of Kiddushin, the woman becomes an Eshes Ish. She's a married woman. Anybody would have relations with her, it would be adultery. But in order for the couple to live together as husband and wife and to have the mutual rights and responsibilities of a Jewish husband and a Jewish wife, so there needs to be a couple other things. Number one, chuppah, and there are a slew of different approaches in our literature about what is defined as chuppah. Uh, uh, Three of the most common are having a canopy above the marriage canopy above the chassan and the kala together. Another is that the chassan stretches a talus from his head over to the head of the kala. A third is the yichud room, uh, and there are other approaches. The That's chuppah. Uh, Besides chuppah, there are the brachos. Now, these are the seven blessings that are stated underneath the chuppah. The Bar Priagafen, and then Shakol Baralik Vodo, Yotzer Adam, another one that ends Yotzer Adam a little longer, etc. Those brachos, with the last one being Asher Bara Sasa V'Simcha Chasam V'Kala Gilarina Tzitza V'Chedva, etc. The husband also gives the wife a ksuva. So the order at a standard wedding would be, nowadays we don't have that Talmudic style year-long wait between Kiddushin and Nisuin. Everything is done right there under the chuppah. The the uh, the Mesader Kiddushin, make sure that that the um, uh, the wedding ring is a shavapruta. Um, the brachos are said. The chassan says, "Hareat mekudeshes libet abbas zo kedas Moshe Yisrael." By brachos, I mean Bar Priagafen and Mekadesh Shama Yisrael. And usually at a wedding today, the ksuva is read. The ksuva is read to create a hefsek, as far as I know, between the two Bar Priagafens, and then they're underneath the chuppah. He gives her the ksuva, and they say the brachos, and they end with the brachos. There are different customs that about the custom of breaking a cup underneath the chuppah. Is that the last thing in a wedding? Is that something in the middle? But the main two stages of marriage are kiddushin and nisuin. Now, the two brachas that are made at the wedding are the birkas erusin and the birkas nisuin. The birkas erusin, that one bracha which was preceded by a bar priagafen, and the birkas nisuin, the six brachas that follow the bar priagafen, the sheva brachos. Now, the question is, what do you say if you don't have a minyan? Now, there is one thing that must be stated before we go on, and that is, do you perform a wedding at all if you don't have a minyan? Well, the the Gemara said Birkos Chasanim. This is in the Gemara in Ksuvos. Birkos Chasanim Basora, that the wedding blessings are done when there are 10 people. If you don't have 10 people, you don't say the wedding blessings. The Gemara also says kala below bracha asura labala kanida, that a kala that doesn't have the blessing is prohibited to her husband. So wait a second, do we go so far as to say that if the couple doesn't, if there's no minyan, that you don't get married? So there's a Rashba that is quoted. The Rashba was asked, a city that doesn't have 10 people, this is Elef Kuf Samech Zayin. It's 1,167 in the Shilos and Chuvas. It's brought in the Beis Yosef in short. If there's not 10 people for Birkos Nisuin, the Efshar le'aviyam sham le'makom acher, and you can't bring them from somewhere else. Im mevarchim Birkos asher bara b'pachos me'asor alo. Do you say asher bara with less than 10? And he says, which is one of the brachos, Birkos chasanim einu b'pachos masora. You don't say it with less than 10. And as we say in the first parak of Ksuvos, and he quotes it on Zayin Abad Aleph, Birkos Chasanim Be'asor, and it brings the sources. And Birkos Ashabara is part of the Birkos Chasanim. So now, that's all he says. However, in the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, so in Samach Beis in Eben Haezer, so in Mevorchin Birchas Chasanim Ela Be'asara, and the Beis Shmuel quotes Uvamakom Deleka Asar, when there's not 10, Ein Lasos Nisuim, you shouldn't get married. That's what the Rashba said. And Ubepiski Maharai, that's, as far as I know, Rav Yisrael Isulain, Holikazah, he argues. Ve'abeis Yosef hiskim l'divrei Rashba. Uvederchei Moshe kasav ein dvarav nirim. Ela ein brachos ma'akvin. So that tshuva of the Rashba was interpreted in a very strong way, that it shouldn't get they shouldn't get married without a minyan, and it would follow that they should go to a place where there is a minyan. However, that is rejected by Piskei Maharai, but for in terms of practical halacha, more significant for the Ramah. So, and that's the way the Beis Shmuel seems to conclude. So there was a voice, though. That's something to remember in this issue. There was a voice that you shouldn't make a wedding without a minyan. And and that voice is not lahalach. Now, so assuming that brachos ein ma'akvos, the blessings of the wedding, don't withhold doing the wedding, meaning that you can do kiddushin. You have to have two witnesses, two kosher witnesses that are adult Jewish males, Torah observant, not related to each other, not related to the chassan or to the kala. So you do need. You need two people. You need a chassan and a kala. But what do you say? So and just as I mentioned in the mailing we sent out, this is not a wild situation, because it very likely came up during COVID. There were weddings that went on with Minyanim, but I'm sure the question was asked. I meant to check. Rav Usher Weiss has a large book of the shilas and shuvas that came up during COVID, and I'm sure it has. I'm sure he has there. I'm sure, but I didn't check. My apologies. The the in tragic situations like wartime and the like, so that can come up. And it can also come up in outlying communities. If you have a couple that wants to become a Baal Tshuva in a tiny village somewhere, and there's very few religious people, um, and for argument, let's posit that it's not realistic for them to go to a place where they're 10 or to delay the wedding. So that's the shiloh. Now, um, let's deal with first Birkas Erusin, then Birkas Nisuin. Uh, there's a machlokas uh, in the Gaonim already about whether there's a need for 10 for Birkas Erusin. Now, the Gemara brings a source for Birkas Nisuin with 10, but it doesn't say anything about Birkas Erusin. However, the sources that it brings say the Shiltos, Rav Achai, one of the Gaonim. Uh, so the sources would apply to Birkas Erusin also. What are the sources? One of the sources is B'makelos Baruch Hu Elokim Hashem Mimakor Yisrael. Bless Hashem in congregations, in large groups, in kihilot, in gatherings. Bless Hashem, mimakor Yisrael, the source of Israel. Now, Chazal understand on that word source, which is an interesting word. So it is also one of the words used for the womb, and uh, it is seen here as referring to marriage, iske makor, matters pertaining to the source, which is marriage. On those kind of things, you need to make a bracha b'makelos in a congregation. Now, this is not a minyan in the sense of uh, this is not a minyan that is required because of a davar shebekadusha, like kaddish and kedusha or something like that. This is a different kind of minyan. It's a minyan required because this thing should be done in a public way in a congregation, b'makelos. There's another pasuk that builds on Boaz, because Boaz, when he gathered 10 men, when he married Ruth, well, he did kedushin also with Ruth, and so maybe kedushin also should require, even though kedushin itself just requires 2 witnesses, but maybe birkas erusin requires 10, just like birkas nisuin does. The blessing does. Rav Shmuel HaNagid, which I assume is the famous Rav Shmuel HaNagid of Spanish Jewry of the Golden Age of Spain. Uh, so, so he differs. The Rush brings both approaches, and the Shulchan Aruch rules. That's in Lamed Daled. The Shulchan Aruch rules that Birkos Erusin Tzrichim Asora Lechatchila, that ideally you should have 10. However, what's clear from the Shulchan Aruch is that 10 are not a necessity. So therefore, if you can't get a minyan, you can do Birkas Erusin, and that's what that's the first line of the tshuva. B'Eben Ezer Simon Lamed Daled Sif Daled Birkas Erusin Tzrichin Asora Lechatchila. And the Beis Shmuel makes it clear, V'imleka asara ein ikuv. But then he says, Aval birkas nisuin ma'akim, and we'll get to that. I just want to dwell on birkas erusin for a moment. Why should or shouldn't birkas erusin require 10? So we discussed in terms of the sources of the derivations, but conceptually, what should be the issue? And this has been tied by the Netziv and others to perhaps what seems to be the core conceptual issue dealt with in the sources about Birkos Erusin, and that is, what is the nature of Birkos Erusin? The Rambam is very clear that Birkos Erusin is a Birkos HaMitzvah. In fact, it starts with the formula of a Birkos HaMitzvah. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav. Vitzivanu. Now, it's a little longer than your standard Birkas HaMitzvah, which usually is a one-liner, but perhaps this has more because of the complexity and the need to clarify that Erusin itself is not going to permit the husband and the wife. So it's a longly formulated blessing. So it's a long formulated, but at the end of the day, it's a blessing over a mitzvah. The mitzvah is Kiddushin. The Rambam holds Kiddushin is a mitzvah, ki kachi shisha. However, others hold that, I believe the Rush is a representative, that Birkas Erusin is not a Birkas HaMitzvah, but rather it's a Birkas HaShevach. It's a praise. In the language of Rav Avram Elia Kaplan, it's lehosif pirsum besimcha v'hoda'ah, to publicize it with joy and thanks. So it should be done in public. Now, if it's a Birkas HaMitzvah, there's no reason a Birkas HaMitzvah should require 10. Birkas HaMitzvah is there's a Birkas HaMitzvah over a mezuzah, over it doesn't require 10. A sukkah, a lulav, whatever it happens to be. Plus, there are those who hold that Kiddushin itself is not a mitzvah. Rather, there's a mitzvah of pru'ravu, there's a mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply. The framework within where Makayim, the mitzvah of pru'ravu, is through Kiddushin and Chuppah. But the Kiddushin itself is not a mitzvah per se. There are other nafkaminas, there are other practical ramifications to this. What about some of the rules of a Birkas HaMitzvah? A Birkas HaMitzvah has to precede the mitzvah. There should not be a hefsek between the bracha and the mitzvah. What if there's a hefsek? I listened to somebody who was giving a shiur on this topic, and he said that he once was Mesader Kiddushin, and the chassan, after the Birkas Erusin, and before he did the Kiddushin, he asked the rabbi again. The chassan was sort of an offbeat kind of a guy, and he said, "Isn't this a nice tie that I got for the wedding?" So that would seemingly be a hefsek. And a Birkas Mitzvah would require not having a hefsek. If it's a Birkas Mitzvah, we say that all the brachos, all the Birkas Mitzvahs are over lasiyasam. They're done preceding the mitzvah act. We say like alachilas matzah, then we eat the matzah. We say al netilas lulav, then we take the lulav. The Ravid is an interesting approach. He said, he seems to say that even though it's a Birkas HaMitzvah, you still do it afterwards. Why? Because maybe the woman won't agree. So you first wait to see if when he says Arei Mekudeshesli, she accepts it willingly. Then you say the bracha, but that's a fluke. But it's really a Birkas HaMitzvah. But others suggest that maybe, it's a Birkas HaShevach. You could do it later on. Other issues that are brought as nafkaminas of this practical issues are who says it. If it's a Birkas mitzvah, so the one who's doing the mitzvah, the chassan should say it. He's doing the kiddushin. The chassan should say the Birkas Erusin, because he's the one who's doing the Erusin. On the other hand, if it's a Birkas HaShevach, so lav dafka the chassan. So you can say, well, if whoever else does it, the Mesader Kiddushin usually does it in our weddings. So you can say he's motzi the chassan. He's saying it so that the chassan fulfills his obligation. But theoretically, if the chassan and the kala didn't hear or didn't pay attention or didn't have any kavanah to be yotze. So if you hold that it's a birkas hashevach, it should be fine. And the issue of 10 seems to be also if it's a praise, then perhaps that's the place for pirsum b'shevach b'simcha v'oda, a joyous and thankful publicity. But if it's a birkas a mitzvah is either a preparation for a mitzvah, it's a matir to a mitzvah, uh, but uh, but it's very hard to say that it would require 10. And sure, if the Rambam does not mention 10 in conjunction with birkas Erisin, even though he does with birkas nisuin, like the Gemara does. Again, you could just say the Gemara doesn't say it. Anyway, so that's one side, and so if again, this is not a shiur in psak halacha, but a shiur in a tshuva in responsa that have to do with the topic, and of course, every Mesader Kedushin is going to be an expert. Chazal say, "Kol misha ein lo eino baki b'tiv gittin v'kedushin lo yelo esek imahem." Anybody who is not an expert on the laws of gittin and kedushin should not be involved in dealing with them. That's why in Israel, certainly, in order to be Mesader Kedushin, you have to have special authorization for the rabbinate. And not every Rosh Hashiva can just be Mekadesh, can just be Mesader Kedushin for their Talmidim. They have to have special authorization from the rabbinate that they are experts in the laws of Gittin and Kedushin. Somebody there's certain expertise, and its own area of halacha that needs to be known well, because things can happen. Things can happen. It's an area where when everything goes well, you can do it with the Art Scroll Sitter. But when anything doesn't go well, you really need to know what you're doing. What happens if somebody the Rav Asher Weiss has a series which I found online for rabbanim that are doing Seder Kedushin to know how to do it properly. So he deals with all the ins and outs of all these topics. Okay, that's Birkas Erisin. So Birkas Erisin is clear that you do say. What about Birkas Nisuin? Now, I'll tell you the outcome right away, and I'll tell you who I think argues. The Shulchan Aruch says, "Ein bevorchin birkas chasanim ela ba'asora gedolim u'bnei chorin v'chasam min minyan." Bein kisha omrim oso b'shas nisuin, bein kisha omrim oso achar birkas hamazon. So the Shulchan Aruch seems to say that you just don't say birkas chasanim if there aren't 10. But then he says, Ela birkas asher bara einot tzarech asora, but he seems to be speaking about birkas hamazon. What about birkas nisuin under the chuppah? The Shulchan Aruch, again, I was reading the Shulchan Aruch in Sif Samach Beis of Even HaEzer, Sif Daled, and he says you only make birkas chasanim when you have 10, whether it's at the time of the nisuin or it's after birkas hamazon. But then he adds, "Aval kishe'enom rimos achar birkas hamazon ela birkas asher bara enu tzorech asara." So it sounds from the Shulchan Aruch that when there's not when you're saying birkas hamazon during the 7 days of Mishteh, when you don't have 10, you still say Asher Bara. But he leaves out Asher Bara under the chuppah. See, there's 2 times we say Bar Pri Hagafen and then another 6 brachas ending with Asher Bara Sasav Simcha under the chuppah. Then at the end of the wedding feast, We say Sheva brachos once again. We say 6 brachos, then we end with Birkos Hamazon. We say Asher Bara. What if you don't have a minyan at the wedding feast? You still say Asher Bara. What about at the chuppah? He doesn't say. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan says explicitly in Samach Beis, in Sifyud Beis, Yesh omrim de b'makom she'i efshar litasef asara. There are those who say that if you can't gather together 10 people, lo yisa sham isha, you shouldn't get married. What do? Not get married at all? Yelechim al makom she'esh asara. Go to a place where there are 10. Mipnei brachos, because of the blessings. And he quotes the Beis Yosef, quoting the Rashba that we saw. Again, it wasn't 100% clear that the Rashba says not to get married, but okay. Aval Rabim Cholkim al, many argue on this, and that's the Beis Shmuel that we brought. The Ramah ends up deciding against that Rashba. The ain't svara klal lomar kain. Deina brachos ma'akvos b'diavad. There's no such svara, and the brachos don't hold you back from getting married. Biach nisen l'chuppah below brachos. You get married without the brachos. Vivorchu achar kama yamim kishiz damen lamasara. After a couple of days, when 10 get together, so you say it. Imiz damnu b'toch shivas yimei mishta. Ve'afshar afilu dachar zman rav omrim hashever brachos keven shadayin lo amrum. V'chein more l'shon harambam perik yud shekosav dim lo berchu birchos chasanim bevorchen afilu achar kama yamim. Uvehasuda lo yivarchu rak asher bara. At the wedding feast, if you don't have 10, you only say Asher Bara, which is Asher Bara Sasam Samcha. That's from the Gemara, that Asher Bara is said at times when all 7 are not said, or all 6 are not said. Uvasuda lo yavarchu Asher Bara. And then here's where he argues with Rav Avraham Melia Kaplan. Aval b'shas hachuppah lo yivarchu salavada. At the chuppah, you shouldn't just say Asher Bara. The b'shas hachuppah lo nitkan rak sheva brachos. The takana is only to say all sheva brachos. So the Aruch HaShulchan is explicit that against that when you don't have a minyan, you don't say any of the sheva brachos at the chuppah. You say Bor Piragafen, Birkas Erusin, Asher Kiddushan Mitzvah Savat Tivanu Al Rayos, etc. They do the Kiddushin, reads the Ksuva, they're under the chuppah, he breaks the glass, nothing holding back from breaking the glass, but there's no brachos, according to him. There's a Noda B'Yehuda, in the Chuvas Noda B'Yehuda. This is in Chelek Aleph, and it's Siman Nunvav. It's quoted in the Pischei Tshuva. So he writes to one of his Talmidim, Rabbi Yoshua. There's an interesting opening where he discusses not having got any of the letters that Rabbi Yoshua sent him, and so on and so forth. And he says, Al davar hamasader kiddushin uberich birkas erusin ubirkas nisuin b'li asora. There was a certain Masader Kiddushin who did the wedding normally. He said Birkas Erusin and Birkas HaNisuin without 10. Bivadai hedyot kazavon plilihu shielo esek betiv Kiddushin. Somebody who's such a simpleton, he doesn't know that basic rule that Birkas Chasanim Basara, well, he shouldn't be Masader Kiddushin. Avalim kol zeh Kiddushin ve'achuppah gamru kinyanam. However, the Kiddushin and the chuppah work, meaning she's married, they don't have to do another chuppah. Not only according to the poskim who say Eina brachos me'akvos, ve'af lechatchila rishai lasos nisuin im efshar limtzo asora, or rishai lisa below bracha, which is what we found. Eina brachos me'akvos abiyah, meaning the couple can have relations in a situation where there's no minyan, even without the brachos. And when they have 10, they'll break. They'll make the bracha. There's no problem at all. But even according to the Rashba that the Beis Shmuel brings, that opinion that is rejected by the Ramah, even they would agree that even they who say that the brachos are ma'akvos, they would say that if somebody made the bracha and there weren't 10, it still worked. And he brings proofs for that. But what I see from the Noda Yehuda is that the simple thing for the Noda Yehuda is that you wouldn't make any brachas at all under the chuppah. He does not mention making asher bora under the chuppah, and I would have expected that to be there if that was the case. However, Rav Avram Elia Kaplan does hold that you should say asher bora. Again, I'll just read his conclusion. We'll jump to the end. Uh, Im b'shas nisun atzum lo ayu sham asor yivarchu berchas asher bara. V'chein yivarchu berchas erusin. K'mo shekasav Beis Shmuel v'hachin aktinon. So he says something which seems to be a chiddush, that you do say asher bara at the chuppah if you don't have a minyan. Even though from the Gemara it only seems that again, there's a machlokas about this, but the side that is paskin la'alacha is that that asher bara by itself is only at the end of benching if you don't have a minyan. Now, and what's his idea? His idea is that you shouldn't have a mitzvah without a bracha at all. Now, other mitzvahs, now this seems to be a new kind of a gather that I didn't meet. And I know that the Aruch HaShulchan argues with it, and I think the Noda Yehuda also argues with it. But here's what he suggests. The whole idea of 10 for Birkos Erusin is to add a dimension of pirsum, of publicizing with joy and thanks. Therefore, now, lefikach birkos chasanim shi birkos hanisuin gam b'shas hadchak lo yivarchu below asara shari mitzvah lo tisher b'li bracha. The mitzvah won't be without a bracha. Why? Denehisha lo yivarchu kol sheva brachas mikol makom yivarchu bracha achas shi birkos asher bara, because they're still going to make asher bara. This is interesting. He's saying, and he says, if Birkas Asher Bara doesn't need 10 for benching, it should need 10. It shouldn't need 10 for the chuppah itself. And he uses the following language: Shim lo yivarchu gam b'shas hadchak shelo ba'asar. If they're not going to make that bracha at all, tishairo sa mitzvah b'li bracha. That mitzvah will be without a bracha. Now that seems to be mechudash to me. That seems to be a new way of looking at things. To say asher bara. And when the Shulchan Aruch, he says, like that we read, says, talks about saying asher bara by itself after Birkos Hamazon, that's because usually there's a minyan for it's talking about a case where there's a minyan for Shas Nisuin. But if inachinami imikla shalo ayusham asara b'Shas Nisuin sheyesh levarach Birkos asher bara. He wants to go as far as saying there's a whole slew of people, the Maharal, and a group of others that are quoted as saying that when you don't have a minyan, you don't add anything you don't even add Asher Bora to Birkas Hamazon. So he wants to say that even they would agree that at the chuppah you should add it, because once again he has this svara of you shouldn't leave the mitzvah of chuppah without a blessing. That I believe is a mechudesh kind of a svara. It's an interesting new idea. So, anyways, in short, uh, when there's no minyan, because the in the discussion of whether uh, the Birkas Erusin is a Birkas a mitzvah, is a Birkas Hashevach, the final ruling on that, based on the Rush, is that we need 10 lechatchila. Ideally, we have 10 to publicize it. Besimcha v'hoda. Again, remember, it's not it's not a minyan for a davar shebekedusha. It's a minyan for publicity, and this is the ruling of the Shiltos, that you need 10 also for Birkas Erusin, because the derivations that appear in the Gemara are applicable also to Erusin. Birkas Nisuin, it seems from the Aruch HaShulchan is explicit, and it seems from the note of Yehuda that if you don't have a minyan, you don't say any brachos under the chuppah. Whereas and again, there is a voice out there which is rejected lahalacha, not to get married, rather to go to a place where there's 10. But Rav Aryeh Elia Kaplan suggests that just like you would say Asher Bara by itself in benching, if you don't have a minyan, you would do that by the chuppah also. Whereas the Aruch HaShulchan explicitly is machalik between those two cases and says they only were metakein the Sheva Brachos at the chuppah. They weren't metakein Asher Bara as a separate unit. So that's an interesting I guess machlokas achronim. I assume the more powerful voice. I have to check it out, like what Besadri Kedushin do, but I assume the more powerful voice would be the Aruch HaShulchan, especially because it's a very mechudesh kind of a svara that he says here, and I think it could be medayik from the Notability also that you wouldn't say any brachos if you don't any brachos nisuin if you don't have a minyan.